Have you ever wondered how my mother kept a family of 7 smiling for an entire winter with nothing but a cellar full of potatoes and a jar of salt? Most people see a boring route, but at 65 I still see 15 different ways to keep a family fed, warm, and happy for pennies. The secret is not in the potato itself. It is in the grease-stained pages of Doña Benedita's notebook from 1950. Today I am opening that notebook to show you how to turn one simple ingredient into a winter of abundance. There was a winter, and I will never forget which one because the cold had a voice that year. It howled through the cracks in the kitchen door and made the windows weep with condensation. I was 9 years old. My father had been laid off from the rail yard in November, and by December the pantry shelves were showing bare wood where jars of preserves used to stand in neat rows. My mother stood in the kitchen that morning with her arms crossed, staring at the root cellar door the way a general stares at a battlefield map. She did not cry. She never cried where we could see her. She simply went down those creaking steps and came back up carrying a burlap sack so heavy it bent her sideways, and she dropped it on the kitchen floor with a sound like a muffled drum. Potatoes. That was what we had. 40 kilos of potatoes, a tin of lard, a sack of coarse salt, a few onions sprouting green fingers, and whatever dried herbs still hung from the beam above the stove. My older brother looked at the sack and said something cruel about eating like pigs. My mother looked at him with that calm, terrifying patience she had and said, "A pig would be lucky to eat the way you are going to eat this winter." She went to the shelf above the icebox and took down Doña Benedita's notebook. It was not really a notebook. It was a collection of pages torn from different sources, some lined, some plain, some brown as tobacco leaf, all held together by a piece of kitchen twine. Doña Benedita had been my grandmother's neighbor in the old country, a woman who had survived 2 wars and a famine, and who believed that the potato was God's apology for winter. She had written down everything she knew about turning that humble tuber into a feast, and when my grandmother emigrated, Doña Benedita pressed the notebook into her hands at the train station and said, "This is worth more than jewelry." My mother inherited it, and she treated it like scripture. The pages were spotted with grease and dusted with flour, and some of the ink had faded to the color of weak tea, but every word was a weapon against hunger. The first transformation began that very morning. My mother peeled 6 large potatoes with a knife so old the handle was black from decades of grip. She did not use a peeler. She said a peeler wasted too much flesh. The peels went into a bowl of cold water, not into the garbage. Nothing went into the garbage. She boiled the potatoes until they were soft enough to crush with a fork, and then she drained them and pushed them through Doña Benedita's wooden sieve, the one with the frame worn smooth as bone. The potato came through the mesh in tiny white worms that piled up like snow. She mixed this with a handful of flour, a pinch of salt, and a spoonful of lard, and she kneaded it on the table until the dough was smooth and elastic and slightly tacky to the touch. This was the base for potato bread. She shaped it into a round loaf, let it rise near the stove for an hour under a damp cloth, and baked it in the oven until the crust was golden and hard, and the inside was dense and moist, with a sweetness that only comes from starch that has been coaxed by heat. When she cut it open, steam rose in a thick cloud, and the smell filled the kitchen with something that felt like safety. We ate it with a scrape of lard and a pinch of salt, and my brother, the one who had complained, ate 3 slices without saying a word. The second meal came that same evening. My mother took more potatoes, boiled them, mashed them with her hands while they were still hot enough to make her wince, and mixed them with flour and an egg from the last hen that was still laying. She rolled the dough into long ropes on the floured table, and we children were given the job of cutting them into small pillows with the back of a fork. Gnocchi. Not the light restaurant kind that dissolves on your tongue. These were heavy, rustic, peasant gnocchi that sat in your stomach like warm stones and kept you full until morning. She fried onions in lard until they were dark and sweet and almost burnt, and she poured this over the gnocchi with a shower of coarse salt. The texture was extraordinary. The outside of each piece had a slight resistance, a skin formed by the flour, and when you bit through it, the inside was creamy and dense and tasted of the earth itself. We sat around the table in the yellow light of the kerosene lamp, and for a few minutes, poverty did not exist. On the third day, my mother made something I had never seen before. She took raw potatoes and grated them on the box grater, and the kitchen filled with a fine mist of white starch that settled on every surface like frost. She squeezed the grated potato in a cloth until the liquid ran clear, and then she spread the dry pulp on a baking tray and put it in the oven at a low heat. She stirred it every few minutes with a wooden spoon, and slowly, over the course of an hour, the shreds dried and curled and turned golden. Homemade potato straws. They were not like anything you buy in a package. They were irregular and thick in some places and thin in others, and they had a deep roasted flavor with a bitterness at the edges that I have never been able to replicate. She stored them in a tin and used them to top everything for the rest of the week. They made even a plain bowl of broth feel like a celebration. The fourth transformation was the one that taught me what a potato could really do. My mother took the water she had saved from boiling potatoes, which was thick and cloudy with dissolved starch, and she used it as the base for a soup. She fried onions and garlic in lard, added chunks of potato, a few wilted carrots that had been hiding in the bottom of the vegetable drawer, and covered everything with the potato water. She let it simmer for hours, and the starch thickened the broth until it was almost a porridge. She called it winter cream, and served it with chunks of the potato bread from the first day, now slightly stale and perfect for soaking. This soup was so thick you could stand a spoon in it. It was not elegant. It was not pretty. But it was the warmest thing I have ever eaten, and when I closed my eyes I could feel it spreading through my chest like a second heartbeat. The fifth creation was a potato pie made entirely in a cast-iron skillet. My mother sliced potatoes paper thin, almost translucent, using a knife and patience that bordered on meditation. She layered them in the skillet with thin slices of onion, pinches of dried thyme, spoonfuls of lard and salt. She pressed each layer down with her palm, and the lard sizzled and popped against her skin, but she did not flinch. She put a lid on the skillet and cooked it on the stovetop over a low flame for nearly an hour, then flipped the whole thing onto a plate with a confidence that made my heart stop. The bottom had formed a crust that was dark amber, almost caramel, and when she cut into it, the layers inside were soft and translucent and bound together by their own starch. It was a pie without pastry, a gratin without cream, a miracle of patience and fat and heat. My neighbors used to knock on our door sometimes, drawn by the smells that leaked through the walls. They were eating boiled potatoes every night, plain, with maybe some salt, and they could not understand how our kitchen smelled like a feast. My mother would smile and offer them a slice of whatever she had made, and they would eat it with wide eyes and ask her secret. She would tap the notebook and say nothing. The truth was simple but hard for people to accept. The potato is a blank canvas, and most people only know one color. Doña Benedita knew the entire palette. I have digitized her complete guide to the 15 potato miracles and all her winter survival wisdom. You will find it in the pinned comment below. Do not let your family suffer through a winter of boredom or an empty pantry when the answer has been under the soil all along. The sixth transformation happened on a night when the power went out and the stove was cold. My mother wrapped 4 large potatoes in wet newspaper, then in a layer of clay from the garden that she kept in a bucket by the door for exactly this purpose. She buried them in the embers of the fireplace and left them for 2 hours. When she pulled them out and cracked the clay shell with the back of a hatchet, the potato inside was smoky, soft, and intensely sweet. The skin had blackened and fused with the flesh in places, creating pockets of bitter char that contrasted with the creamy interior. She split them open and filled them with a spoonful of lard and salt, and we ate them with our fingers, burning our mouths and not caring. This was the oldest way to cook a potato, she said, before ovens, before pots, before civilization decided it needed recipes. Just fire and earth and hunger. The 7th miracle was preservation itself. My mother peeled and sliced potatoes into rounds, soaked them in brine for 3 days in a ceramic crock, then packed them in jars with vinegar and dried bay leaves. These pickled potatoes lasted for months and had a tangy, firm texture that was completely different from fresh ones. She added them to stews, fried them with onions, or ate them cold as a side dish. The brine itself became a cooking liquid, salty and slightly sour, perfect for deglazing a pan or thinning a sauce. Nothing was wasted. The potato gave everything it had, and my mother took everything it offered. The 8th creation was my favorite, and it is the one I still make every winter: potato pancakes. My mother grated raw potatoes on the fine side of the grater, mixed them with a little flour, salt, and a grated onion, and fried spoonfuls in hot lard until they were crispy on the outside and soft and steaming on the inside. The edges were lacy and dark, almost burnt, and they shattered when you bit into them, giving way to a center that was dense and earthy and slightly sweet. In Germany they call them Kartoffelpuffer. In Poland they are plaki ziemniaczane. In every cold country on earth, someone's grandmother made these, because they are the perfect food. They are cheap, they are filling, they are delicious, and they require nothing but a potato, a fire, and a pair of hands that know what they are doing. My mother made them every Friday, and the smell of frying potatoes and onions became the smell of the end of the work week, the smell of rest, the smell of home. The 9th transformation was born from necessity on a day when even the lard was running low. My mother boiled potatoes with their skins on, mashed them roughly, and mixed them with every last bit of fat she could scrape from the bottom of the lard tin. She added salt and a few drops of vinegar and beat the mixture with a wooden spoon until it was smooth and glossy. This was peasant mashed potatoes, the kind that sticks to your ribs and makes you sleep like the dead. It was not the fluffy, buttery puree of restaurant kitchens. It was heavy, gray-white, and dense as clay. But it was warm, and it was filling, and when she served it in deep bowls with a fried onion on top, it felt like mercy. She sometimes added a boiled egg, chopped fine, when we had one, and this turned the mash into something almost luxurious. The key, she said, was to beat the potatoes until your arm ached, because the beating released the starch and made the texture creamy without needing butter or milk. The 10th meal was a thick stew built on potato starch. My mother peeled and cubed potatoes, fried them in a little lard with onions and whatever scraps of dried meat she had, then added water and let it cook until the potatoes began to fall apart. The starch from the dissolving potatoes thickened the liquid into a gravy, and she adjusted the salt and added a bay leaf and a few peppercorns. This was not a soup, it was a stew so thick you ate it with a fork. The potato pieces that had not dissolved held their shape just enough to give texture, and the ones that had dissolved gave the whole thing a body and richness that belied its humble ingredients. She served it over slices of day-old potato bread, and the bread soaked up the gravy and became a second meal within the meal. The 11th miracle was my mother's answer to the problem of potato skins. She never threw them away. She collected them in a bowl all week, and on Sunday she fried them in lard until they were crispy and curled like autumn leaves. She salted them heavily and served them as a snack while the main meal cooked. They were bitter and earthy and incredibly satisfying, and they taught me a lesson I have never forgotten. The parts of food that most people throw away are often the most flavorful. The skin of a potato has more taste than the flesh. It has more texture, more character, more of the soil's memory. My mother knew this, and Doña Benedita knew it before her. The 12th preparation was a potato dough that could become almost anything. My mother boiled and riced potatoes, mixed them with flour and salt, and used this dough as a wrapper for whatever filling she could invent. Sometimes it was fried onions. Sometimes it was a bit of cheese that a neighbor had given us. Sometimes it was nothing but herbs and lard. She shaped them into half moons, boiled them like dumplings, and served them in broth or fried in a pan. This was the ancestor of every filled pasta and every dumpling in every culture. It was proof that the potato does not merely substitute for wheat, it surpasses it. The 13th trick was storage. My mother kept a wooden crate in the coldest corner of the cellar, filled with dry sand. She buried the potatoes in layers, each one separated from the next, and they lasted through the entire winter without sprouting or softening. She checked them every week, turning them gently and removing any that showed signs of decay before they could infect the others. This was not cooking. This was animal husbandry. She tended those potatoes the way a shepherd tends a flock, because they were our survival, and survival requires vigilance. The 14th creation was a potato salad unlike any you have ever tasted. She boiled the potatoes until they were just cooked, sliced them while they were still warm, and dressed them with vinegar, salt, a little water, and a spoonful of mustard she had made from ground seeds and vinegar. There was no mayonnaise, no cream, no sugar. It was sharp, earthy, and deeply satisfying, and she served it at room temperature alongside whatever protein she could find. It was a side dish that demanded respect, not decoration. The 15th and final miracle was the simplest and the most profound. On the last night before spring, when the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the mud, my mother took the last potato from the sand crate. It was soft and wrinkled and had begun to sprout pale white fingers. She did not cook it. She cut it into pieces, each with an eye, and she planted them in the garden. She stood there with dirt under her fingernails and said, "This is the real recipe. Everything comes from the soil, and everything goes back to it." I am 65 years old now. I have a kitchen with an electric stove and a refrigerator full of food, and I have never known real hunger since that winter. But I still make potato bread when the first frost comes. I still fry potato pancakes on Friday nights. I still keep Doña Benedita's notebook in a drawer, and sometimes I take it out and hold it and smell the old grease and flour. And I am 9 years old again in that yellow kitchen, watching my mother turn nothing into everything. The modern world tells you that you need 40 ingredients and a recipe from the internet to feed your family. Doña Benedita knew better. She knew that a single potato, handled with knowledge and love and the patience of someone who has survived real winter, is worth more than a full supermarket. The wealth is not in the variety of what you buy. It is in the depth of what you know. And that knowledge, like a potato in sand, keeps through the longest winter if you tend it with care.